What happens when a struggling law student working as a waitress to pay for her mother's medical bills is publicly humiliated and fired on the spot, her crime refusing to be invisible? The man who demanded it. Alistair Finch, a billionaire accustomed to the world bending to his will. He thought he had crushed a fly he could swat away without a second thought. But he made one catastrophic mistake. He didn't realize that in trying to silence her, he had just armed a future lawyer with her first and most personal case. The next morning, the restaurant owner who fired her wasn't greeting wealthy patrons. He was being served. This isn't a story about a waitress getting fired. It's about the moment a titan realized he had picked a fight with a giant in the making. The air inside Aurelia, a restaurant nestled in the most expensive zip code of downtown Chicago, was thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet money. It was a place where conversations were held in hushed tones, but the clinking of wine glasses and the flash of Patek Philippe watches spoke volumes. For Maya Rodriguez, it was both a lifeline and a gilded cage. At 24, Maya was a woman living a dual life. By day, she was a second-year law student at Northwestern, buried in torts and constitutional law, her mind sharp and hungry for justice. By night, she donned the crisp black uniform of an Aurelia waitress, her posture perfect, her smile practiced, and her spirit carefully tucked away. The job paid for the mountain of student debt, and more pressingly, the experimental treatment for her mother's worsening multiple sclerosis. Every forced smile, every cleared plate, every polite nod to a man who looked right through her was a small sacrifice on the altar of her mother's health. Her manager, Mr. Gerald Henderson, was a man sculpted from anxiety and ambition. He managed Aurelia less like a restaurant and more like a fragile ecosystem of egos. To him, the staff were interchangeable cogs, but the patrons were gods. Their satisfaction was paramount, their whims were law, and their wealth was the sun around which his entire world orbited. He often reminded his staff, "Here we are invisible. We are ghosts who make magic happen. The moment a guest notices you for the wrong reason is the moment you have failed." Tonight was a Tuesday, typically a slower evening, but a low buzz of anticipation filled the air. A reservation had been made under the name Finch. Not just any Finch, Alistair Finch, the Alistair Finch, a man whose name was a synonym for corporate raiding and ruthless efficiency. He was a modern-day king, a private equity ghoul who bought companies, stripped them for parts, and walked away with billions while thousands lost their jobs. His face, a permanent mask of cold calculation, was a regular feature in the Wall Street Journal. His arrival meant Henderson was vibrating with a nervous energy that set everyone on edge. Rodriguez Henderson hissed, pulling Maya aside as she balanced a tray of empty champagne flutes. His eyes darted around the dining room. "Table 7. Finch, you're on it. You are the best I have. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not offer opinions. Your name is Thank You, and your purpose is to anticipate. Is that clear, crystal, Mr. Henderson?" Maya said, her voice a calm, professional monotone that betrayed none of the churning in her stomach. She hated these nights. Serving the merely wealthy was one thing. They were often demanding, but ultimately forgettable. Serving the titans, the world shapers like Finch, was another. They didn't just want service, they demanded fealty. They looked at you and saw not a person, but a function, a tool to be used and discarded. When Finch arrived with his 2 associates, a hush fell over their section of the dining room. He was exactly as he appeared in photographs, tall, impeccably dressed, in a custom Tom Ford suit, with silver hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He didn't walk. He moved as if the ground rearranged itself for his convenience. Maya approached the table, her training kicking in. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Aurelia. May I start you with some water, still or sparkling?" Finch didn't even look at her. He was already deep in a hushed, aggressive conversation with one of his associates, gesturing dismissively with a hand that wore a ring worth more than Maya's entire tuition. The associate, a younger man with a nervous sweat on his brow, looked at Maya with a flicker of apology before turning back to his boss. The third man simply stared at his phone, scrolling endlessly. Maya stood there for a full 30 seconds, a ghost in a black dress, waiting to be acknowledged. It was a classic power play, one she'd seen 100 times. "You wait for me. My time is important. Yours is not." Finally, without lifting his gaze from his associate, Finch said, "3 glasses of the Macallan 25. And don't hover." The words were clipped, cold, and utterly dismissive. Maya felt the familiar prickle of indignation, but she smothered it. She thought of her mother's smile of the next tuition payment. She turned on her heel. "Of course, sir." She murmured to the empty air and walked away. The gilded cage felt particularly small tonight. The dinner was an exercise in calculated humiliation. Finch never once made eye contact with Maya. He would gesture vaguely in the air for a refill, tap his fork against his plate if he wanted it cleared, and once he dropped his napkin, stared at it on the floor, and then looked pointedly at Henderson, who was loitering nearby, until Henderson himself scurried over to pick it up. Maya performed her duties with flawless robotic precision. She was the ghost Henderson wanted her to be. She refilled water glasses before they were empty, replaced silverware with silent efficiency, and described the dinner specials to the 2 associates as Finch himself seemed utterly uninterested in the pretense of ordering. He simply pointed at an item on the menu, the $250 Wagyu steak, and grunted. The breaking point didn't come from a grand explosion, but from a small, cruel spark. As Maya was clearing the main course plates, the younger associate, perhaps emboldened by the whiskey or simply trying to curry favor with his boss, made a comment about the soaring cost of living in the city. Finch let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. "It's a simple market correction. It weeds out the weak. People who can't afford to live here shouldn't. It's a city for winners." He then gestured with his chin towards Maya, his eyes finally landing on her, though not on her, but rather through her. "Take our girl here. I'm sure she has aspirations. Maybe she dreams of being a lawyer or a doctor." He smirked. "But some people are just meant to fetch things. It's the natural order. She should accept it and be grateful for the tips." The other men chuckled nervously. The insult was so casual, so profoundly dismissive, it sucked the air from Maya's lungs. It wasn't just about her. It was a judgment on her mother, her sacrifices, her dreams. It was the voice of a man who saw the world as nothing more than a hierarchy, with him at the apex and everyone else as stepping stones. In that moment, all the lectures on contracts, all the nights spent reading case law, all the ingrained principles of justice and dignity coalesced in her mind. Her training as a waitress demanded silence. Her education as a lawyer demanded a response. She paused, plates in hand, and stood perfectly still. She didn't turn to face him directly, but spoke in a clear, calm, and dangerously steady voice. "With all due respect, sir," she began her words, slicing through the hushed ambiance of the restaurant. "The natural order you speak of is often just a construct designed by those who benefit from it to keep others in their place." Silence fell over the table. The associates froze their forks halfway to their mouths. Finch's cold eyes slowly narrowed, focusing on Maya for the very first time. He was no longer looking through her. He was looking at her, and with an expression of pure, venomous disbelief. Maya continued, her heart hammering against her ribs. but her voice unwavering. My aspirations and my capacity to achieve them are not defined by my current circumstances, and the tips I am grateful for are a compensation for my labor, not a gift for which I should genuflect. She placed the plates gently onto her tray, her movements deliberate. She had not raised her voice. She had not been rude. She had simply talked back. She had asserted her own humanity in a place where it was meant to be checked at the door. Alistair Finch's face turned a dark, mottled red. He wasn't used to being contradicted, especially not by someone he considered less than furniture. He slowly pushed his chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the silent room. "Did you just lecture me?" he asked, his voice a low, threatening growl. Before Maya could even think to respond, Mr. Henderson was there, materializing from the shadows like a panicked wraith. "Mr. Finch, sir, I am so sorry. Please accept my deepest apologies. There is no excuse for this. Absolutely none." He turned on Maya, his face a mask of white-hot fury and terror. "Rodriguez, what do you think you are doing?" Finch rose to his full height, a towering inferno of insulted pride. He pointed a finger at Maya, his hand trembling slightly with rage. "I came here for a quiet dinner. Henderson, not a philosophy lesson from the help. Get her out of my sight. Now. She's fired." The word hung in the air, a guillotine's blade. Other diners were now staring, their quiet conversations ceasing. Henderson didn't hesitate. He grabbed Maya's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "You heard the man? You're fired. Get your things and get out. You are finished here." He was practically dragging her towards the kitchen, his voice a desperate pleading whisper to Finch. "She's gone, sir. Consider it done. Your dessert is on the house. Everything is on the house." Maya stumbled, yanked off balance. She looked back at the table. Finch was smoothing down his suit jacket, his expression one of grim satisfaction, as if he'd just successfully exterminated a pest. The two associates were staring down at their plates, refusing to meet her eyes. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. She was frog-marched through the bustling kitchen, the eyes of her co-workers, pitying, shocked and fearful, following her every step. Henderson shoved her towards the staff lockers. "Are you insane?" He hissed, his face inches from hers. "Do you have any idea who that is? He could buy this building and demolish it with me inside, just because he didn't like the color of my tie. You just cost me my most important customer, and you did it for what?" To feel smart for 5 seconds. Maya said nothing. She was numb. She opened her locker, her hands shaking, as she pulled out her worn backpack containing her law books. The weight of them felt heavier than ever. "Give me your uniform," Henderson demanded, holding out his hand. "You don't deserve to wear it." Slowly she unbuttoned the black apron and shirt, handing them over. Standing there in her simple tank top and slacks, she felt stripped of more than just her uniform. She had been cast out, deemed unworthy. She grabbed her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out the back door into the cold Chicago night, the clang of the metal door sealing her fate, or so she thought. The walk to the L train station was a blur. The city lights, usually a source of comfort and ambition, for Maya seemed to mock her. Each gleaming skyscraper felt like a monument to a world she had just been violently ejected from. The words echoed in her head. Some people are just meant to fetch things. She's fired. By the time she reached her tiny third-floor walk-up apartment in a neighborhood far from the glitz of Aurelia, the numbness had receded, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. She dropped her keys on the small table by the door and slid down the wall, her backpack thudding to the floor. The reality came crashing in. No job, no income. Her rent was due in a week. The next payment for her mother's treatment was due in 2. The small emergency fund she had was a pittance, barely enough to cover groceries for a month. Panic, cold and sharp, began to tighten its grip around her chest. She had stood up for her dignity, but what would that dignity buy her now? How could she explain this to her mother without causing her immense stress? The one thing her doctors warned against. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over her mum's contact photo. She couldn't do it. Not yet. She scrolled through her contacts, a list of fellow students, a few friends all as broke and stressed as she was. There was no one she could turn to for financial help. Then her thumb stopped on a name she hadn't called in almost a year, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor Vance wasn't just a lawyer, she was a force of nature. A partner at Sterling Vance and Associates, one of Chicago's most formidable litigation firms specializing in labor and employment law. She was a legend in the legal community, a woman who had taken on multinational corporations and won a shark in a world of minnows. A year ago, Maya had been selected for a highly competitive summer internship at Eleanor's firm. She had been assigned directly to Eleanor, and for 3 months Maya had lived and breathed the law at its highest level. Eleanor was a demanding, terrifyingly brilliant mentor. She saw the spark in Maya, the relentless work ethic, the sharp intellect, and beneath the quiet exterior, a core of unbendable principle. Eleanor had pushed her harder than any professor, challenging her assumptions, shredding her legal memos, and then rebuilding them with her line by line. On Maya's last day, Eleanor had given her a personal business card. "Don't lose this," she'd said, her tone stern, but her eyes holding a rare glimmer of approval. "When you're ready to practice law for real, call me. And if you ever find yourself in a fight, you can't win alone, call me." Maya had never imagined she'd be making that call so soon and for something so personal. It felt like using a nuclear weapon to kill a spider. This was just a waitress job. People got fired every day. What right did she have to bother a legal titan like Eleanor Vance over a personal humiliation, a fight you can't win alone? This felt like that. Alistair Finch was not just a rude customer. He was a symbol of the very power structures she was studying to dismantle. He hadn't just gotten her fired. He had sought to erase her personhood for his own fleeting satisfaction. This wasn't just about lost wages. It was about the Principal Finch, so arrogantly claimed to understand the natural order of things. Her hand shaking, she pressed the call button. It was nearly 10 p.m., but she knew Eleanor often worked late. It rang twice. Vance, a crisp, no-nonsense voice, answered. "Ms. Vance. It's Maya Rodriguez, your intern from last summer." There was a brief pause. Maya's heart sank, thinking she'd been forgotten. But then Eleanor's voice returned a fraction warmer. "Maya. Of course. I was just reviewing the amicus brief you helped draft on the Kellerman case. It's holding up beautifully. I trust you're not calling to critique my final edits." Maya let out a shaky breath, a half laugh, half sob. "No, ma'am. Nothing like that. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but you told me to call if—" Her voice broke. She took a moment to compose herself, the shame and anger welling up again. "Maya, what's wrong?" Eleanor's tone shifted instantly, sharpening with concern. All traces of pleasantry were gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a litigator sensing trouble. Taking a deep breath, Maya recounted the entire evening from the moment Alistair Finch walked in to the demeaning comments to her quiet retort and the brutal public firing by Mr. Henderson. She relayed the story with the precision of a law student, stating the facts, quoting the exact words used, painting a clear picture of the power dynamics at play. She left nothing out, including the profound sense of hopelessness that now consumed her. When she finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. For a terrifying moment, Maya thought Eleanor was going to tell her she'd overreacted, that this was the way of the world, and she needed to learn to swallow her pride. But the voice that finally came through the speaker was low and dangerously cold. It was a voice Maya had heard her use only once before, during a particularly vicious cross-examination. "What was the man's name again?" Eleanor asked. "Finch. Alistair Finch." Another pause, this one crackling with a strange energy. "I know the name," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "And the restaurant was Aurelia on Rush Street, yes, ma'am. The owner who physically removed you. His name, Gerald Henderson." Maya Eleanor said, her voice, now devoid of all emotion, replaced by a chilling calm. "First, I want you to take a deep breath. You did nothing wrong. You asserted your right to basic human dignity. In my book, that is never a fireable offense. Second, I want you to write down every single detail you remember, every word, every gesture, the names of any co-workers who witnessed it. Email it to me tonight. Third, do not, under any circumstances, contact Mr. Henderson or anyone else from that restaurant. Do not respond if they contact you. Do you understand, yes, Ms. Vance? Good. Now get some rest. I will handle this. Be at my office tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. sharp. We have work to do." Before Maya could even process what was happening or offer her thanks, the line went dead. She stared at her phone, the silence of her apartment suddenly feeling different. It was no longer the silence of despair, but the quiet electric hum before a storm. She didn't know why Eleanor Vance was taking this so seriously, but she knew one thing for certain. Alistair Finch had picked a fight with a waitress, but he was about to find himself in a war with a titan. The next morning, the grand mahogany-panelled lobby of Sterling Vance and Associates felt like a world away from the greasy back alley of Aurelia. Maya, dressed in her only interview-appropriate suit, felt like an imposter. But when she was ushered immediately into Eleanor Vance's corner office overlooking the Chicago River, the feeling vanished, replaced by a sense of purpose. Eleanor stood waiting, not behind her massive desk, but by the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was the picture of power, a tailored Armani suit, an air of utter command, and eyes that missed nothing. She gestured for Maya to sit. "I read your email." Eleanor began, her voice calm and measured. It was precise and thorough. "You have a gift for recall." She walked over to her desk and picked up a thick, freshly bound document. "Based on your account, Mr. Henderson's actions, and the direct involvement of his patron, Mr. Finch, we have a clear case for several torts. Wrongful termination in violation of public policy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and most interestingly, defamation." Maya blinked. Defamation. By publicly firing you and physically escorting you out on the word of a patron. Henderson created a scene that strongly implied you had done something worthy of immediate termination, theft, gross misconduct, something that would justify such a dramatic and humiliating spectacle. That's defamation per se. It harms your professional reputation. Eleanor's lips curved into a wry, dangerous smile. It's elegant, and it's going to be very, very expensive for them. She slid the document across the polished desk. On the cover, in stark black letters, were the words Maya Rodriguez Vernas Aurelia, LLC, and Gerald Henderson. "I've already had this drafted and filed with the court this morning," Eleanor stated. "It's a summons and a formal complaint. Now we're going to have it served." The fun part. Eleanor pressed a button on her intercom. "Daniel, are you ready?" A moment later, a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 30s entered the office. He had the build of a former athlete and the watchful eyes of a hawk. "Maya, this is Daniel Harrington. He's our firm's lead private investigator and "Process server extraordinaire," Eleanor said. "Daniel, this is Maya Rodriguez, our client." Daniel nodded at Maya with a polite, reassuring smile. "A pleasure, Ms. Rodriguez." Eleanor handed the legal documents to Daniel. "Aurelia, around 11:30 a.m. Henderson should be there prepping for the lunch rush. I want him served personally. I want it to be quiet, professional, and utterly disruptive to his day." "Consider it done," Eleanor Daniel said, tucking the documents into a sleek leather briefcase. He gave Maya another nod and was gone. "Now," Eleanor said, turning back to Maya, "we wait." At 11:32 a.m., Gerald Henderson was in his element. The dining room of Aurelia was pristine, the silverware gleamed, and the scent of fresh flowers mingled with lemon polish. He was personally briefing his waitstaff for the lunch service, his voice a low, urgent hum. He had managed to smooth things over with Alastair Finch's office, offering a lifetime of complimentary meals, which had been accepted with a cold silence that Henderson took as a victory. The incident with the waitress, he couldn't even recall her name, now was a minor blip, a problem solved. He was just explaining the subtleties of the new wine pairing when the restaurant's hostess approached him, a confused look on her face. "Mr. Henderson, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's a legal matter." Henderson's blood ran cold. His mind immediately went to health code violations, immigration audits, all the nightmares that kept a restaurant owner awake. He plastered on his most charming smile and walked to the front. Standing there was Daniel Harrington. He didn't look like a cop or a government agent. He looked like one of their patrons' expensive suit, confident posture. "Mr. Gerald Henderson," Daniel asked, his voice pleasant. "I am." "How can I help you?" Henderson asked, already preparing to de-escalate whatever this was. Daniel smiled thinly. "You've been served." Without any further ceremony, he reached into his briefcase and produced the thick legal document, holding it out. Henderson stared at it, as if it were a venomous snake. The words Maya Rodriguez versus Aurelia LLC were visible at the top. Rodriguez. The name hit him like a physical blow. The waitress. "I don't understand," he stammered, refusing to take the papers. The hostess and a few nearby staff members were now openly staring. "It's quite simple," Daniel said, his voice dropping slightly, but losing none of its authority. "This is a lawsuit. You are being sued. My instructions are to serve you personally. You can either take this document, or I can leave it here at your feet in front of your entire staff and your incoming guests. The legal effect is the same, but one is considerably more embarrassing than the other. Your choice." Henderson's face, which had been a healthy pink, was now the color of ash. His hands trembled as he reached out and took the papers. The weight of them felt immense, terrifying. He flipped open the first page and saw the numbers. The complaint was seeking damages, punitive and compensatory, in an amount that made his head spin. It was more than the restaurant made in a year. Daniel Harrington gave a curt nod. "You and your legal counsel have 21 days to respond. I'd advise you not to be late." He then turned and walked out of Aurelia, leaving a stunned, deathly quiet dining room in his wake. Henderson stood frozen, the papers clutched in his hand. The illusion of control, the carefully curated world of quiet luxury he had built, had just been shattered. He looked up and saw the faces of his employees. They were no longer looking at him with fear or respect, but with a new, dangerous expression: curiosity. They were watching to see what would happen to the man who threw one of their own to the wolves. In that moment, Gerald Henderson understood. The problem he thought he had solved by firing a nobody waitress hadn't gone away. It had just come back with a lawyer. Back in Eleanor Vance's office, the atmosphere was one of focused calm. Maya was trying to wrap her head around the speed and ferocity of Eleanor's response. "I don't understand," Maya finally said, looking at the formidable woman across the desk. This is so much." "I thought maybe we'd send a letter ask for a few weeks. Severance. This is a full-blown federal lawsuit. Why are you dedicating so much of your firm's resources to this to me?" Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the Chicago skyline. For the first time, the mask of the invincible litigator seemed to slip, revealing something more personal, something colder. "Because this isn't just about you, Maya," she said, her voice low. "It's about him, Alistair Finch." She swiveled her chair back to face Maya directly. "You were right to ask. I haven't been entirely forthcoming. My interest in this case is both professional and deeply personal. 15 years ago, my father, Robert Vance, was the CEO of a mid-sized manufacturing company called Vanguard Automotive Parts. They were a third-generation, family-run business based in Ohio. They weren't glamorous, but they were the lifeblood of their town. They employed over 2,000 people. Eleanor's eyes took on a distant, haunted look. My father built that company. He knew every employee by name. He worked on the factory floor with them when he was a teenager. It was his life's work. She paused, taking a slow breath. Then Alistair Finch and his private equity firm, Finch Global, came along. They saw an undervalued asset. They initiated a hostile takeover. My father fought them with everything he had, but Finch was ruthless. He used every dirty trick proxy battles, spreading rumors to drive down the stock price, turning the board against him. In the end, Finch won. "What happened to the company?" Maya asked softly. "Finch did what he always does," Eleanor said, a bitter edge to her voice. "He broke it apart. He sold off the real estate to a developer. He sold the patents to a foreign competitor. He liquidated the machinery. And he gutted the pension fund to pay for the acquisition debt, leaving the retirees with pennies on the dollar. Within 6 months, all 2,000 employees were laid off. The town was devastated. It never recovered. The story was chillingly familiar. Maya had studied cases like this in her corporate law classes, but they had always been abstract, just numbers on a page. And my father, Eleanor, continued. It destroyed him. He lost his company, his legacy, and he felt he had failed every single person who had ever depended on him. He was a proud man, Maya. The shame and the stress, it took a terrible toll on his health. He had a massive stroke a year later. He spent the last 5 years of his life in a wheelchair, unable to speak. Alistair Finch didn't just bankrupt my father. He silenced him. The silence in the room was profound. Maya finally understood. This wasn't just a case, it was a reckoning. Finch is named in the complaint as a co-defendant, isn't he? Maya guessed. Eleanor shook her head. No, not yet. That's the strategic part. Finch is a billionaire. He's insulated by layers of lawyers and corporate shells. Suing him directly right now would be a long, bloody war of attrition he could easily win. But Henderson is his weak point. Henderson is terrified. He's a small business owner who just had his world turned upside down. Eleanor stood up and began to pace, her energy filling the room. We are going to put Henderson in the legal equivalent of a pressure cooker. We'll file for discovery demand his financials, his employee, records his correspondence. We'll depose him and every single employee who witnessed the event. We will make this lawsuit so painful, so expensive, and so disruptive for him that he will have no choice but to seek a settlement. And when he does, our primary demand will not just be monetary compensation for you. She stopped and looked directly at Maya. Our primary demand will be a sworn public affidavit from Gerald Henderson detailing the exact sequence of events, including the precise role Alistair Finch played in your termination. We are going to get Finch's name, his actions, and his words into the public record under oath. We will make Henderson choose between his business and his loyalty to the man who uses him as a doormat. Maya was stunned by the brilliance and the beautiful cold-blooded simplicity of the strategy. They weren't attacking the king directly. They were turning his own pawn against him. Finch believes he is untouchable. Eleanor concluded, her voice now a steely whisper. He believes his money makes him immune to consequences. He moves through the world, breaking things, companies, towns, people, and he never looks back. He tried to break you, Maya, for the crime of having a spine. He thought it would be easy. But he doesn't know that you're with me now. And I have been waiting 15 years for an opportunity to remind Alistair Finch that even kings can be brought to their knees. For Maya, the case had transformed. It was no longer just about her job or her pride. It was about her father, her mother, and now Eleanor's father. It was a fight for all the nobodies that men like Finch thought they could crush without a second thought. She nodded, her resolve hardening into steel. "What do we do first?" she asked. Eleanor Vance smiled. "First, we make Mr. Henderson sweat." The legal pressure campaign began immediately and was brutally effective. Eleanor's firm flooded Aurelia's newly hired and clearly outmatched lawyers with motions and discovery requests. They demanded every email and text message sent by Henderson for the past year. They requested years of payroll records to search for any wage and hour violations. They scheduled depositions for every single employee on shift that night. For Gerald Henderson, it was a living nightmare. His legal bills were skyrocketing. His staff was in a constant state of anxiety, whispering in corners about the lawsuit. Business began to suffer as the tense atmosphere permeated the dining room. He was trapped. As Eleanor predicted, Henderson's lawyers reached out to initiate settlement talks, and just as she had strategized, their first offer was a low-ball monetary sum with a strict non-disclosure agreement. Eleanor rejected it flatly. "Tell your client the money is secondary," Eleanor had said over the phone with Maya listening in on speaker. "The settlement starts with a public apology and a full affidavit regarding Mr. Finch's conduct. Or we'll see you at the deposition." The rejection sent Henderson into a full-blown panic. He did the only thing he could think of. He called Alistair Finch's office, begging for help. This was the moment Finch, who had dismissed the incident as a trivial annoyance, was finally forced to pay attention. He was furious. That a waitress, a non-entity, could cause this much trouble was an insult to his worldview. He summoned his own legal team, a phalanx of ruthless corporate lawyers from the notorious firm of Cravath, Swain and Moore. Finch's strategy was not defense. It was attack. He would not be dragged into this mess by a sniveling restaurant owner. He would crush the source of the problem, Maya Rodriguez. Within days, Maya's life became a fishbowl. A private investigator, a much more sinister version of the firm's Daniel Harrington, began tailing her. He sat in a car outside her apartment building. He followed her to the university library. Her friends reported getting strange phone calls from a man claiming to be a background checker for a scholarship, asking deeply personal questions about Maya's character, her finances, her social life. They were digging for dirt. They were looking for anything they could use to paint her as unstable a liar, a gold digger. The constant surveillance was terrifying. Maya felt exposed, vulnerable. She started looking over her shoulder everywhere she went. She called Eleanor her voice, trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "They're trying to intimidate me, to break me." I know Eleanor's voice was grim. This is Finch's playbook. He doesn't fight the case, he fights the person. Stay strong, Maya. They're doing this because they're scared. They can't find any real dirt, so they're manufacturing pressure. Don't let him win. But Finch wasn't just coming after Maya. He was also squeezing Henderson. One of Finch Global's subsidiaries happened to be the primary lender for the commercial real estate group that owned the building Aurelia was in. A single phone call from Finch was all it took. Suddenly, Henderson's lease was under review for minor compliance infractions. The threat was clear. Drop Finch's name, and your restaurant will be homeless. Henderson was now caught between two terrifying forces, Eleanor's legal onslaught and Finch's financial guillotine. The situation seemed to be at a stalemate. Finch had successfully insulated himself, and Maya was withstanding the intimidation campaign, but the path to getting Finch's name on the record was now blocked by Henderson's terror. This is when the first twist arrived from a direction no one expected. Daniel Harrington, Eleanor's investigator, had been conducting his own much more discreet investigation. He wasn't just looking into Henderson's finances. He was looking into Alastair Finch's activities on the night of the incident. He called Eleanor and Maya in for an urgent meeting. He laid a single glossy photograph on the conference table. It was a picture taken from across the street from Aurelia through the large front window with a powerful telephoto lens. It showed Table 7. It showed Finch, his face contorted in a sneer, pointing directly at Maya as she stood holding the plates. It was a perfect, damning image of the confrontation. "Where did you get this?" Eleanor asked, her eyes wide. "This is where it gets interesting," Daniel said. "I started by pulling all the credit card receipts from Aurelia that night, looking for other patrons who could be potential witnesses. One name stuck out, Peter Malik. He paid for a single club soda and sat at the bar for 2 hours. Didn't eat a thing. When I ran his name, I found out he's not a diner. He's a freelance photojournalist, and he specializes in investigative work." Daniel leaned forward. I tracked him down. He was cagey at first, but when I explained who we were and what the case was about, he opened up. It turns out Finch wasn't just having dinner that night. His two associates weren't from his company. One was a city councilman, Robert Sadler, and the other was a high-level zoning commissioner. Finch was there for a backroom deal. Maya and Eleanor exchanged a look. Finch is trying to push through a massive, controversial waterfront development project, Daniel explained. He needs zoning variances and city council approval, and he's been greasing palms to get it. Malik got a tip that Finch was meeting with the councilman at Aurelia to apply some pressure. He was there to get a photo of the meeting to prove the improper connection. He tapped the photo of Maya and Finch. He got more than he bargained for. He said your confrontation completely derailed the meeting. The councilman and the commissioner got spooked by Finch's public display of temper. They made their excuses and left shortly after you were fired. According to Malik, Finch's multi-billion-dollar project is now stalled because of it. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Finch's rage wasn't just about a waitress talking back to him. Maya hadn't just bruised his ego. She had inadvertently cost him a crucial multi-million-dollar negotiation. His viciousness was the fury of a predator whose kill had been snatched away. But the real bombshell was yet to come. "There's one more thing," Daniel said, his expression serious. "Malik told me someone else was there that night. Someone who saw everything, but who wasn't on the staff list or the credit card receipts. The restaurant was using a new temp coat check girl that evening, a fill-in from an agency." He slid another piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the agency's timesheet for that night. Eleanor picked it up. She read the name signed at the bottom, and her entire body went rigid. Her face went pale, and she slowly sank back into her chair, her hand covering her mouth. Maya leaned over to look. The name on the timesheet was Isabella Vance. Isabella, Maya whispered. Any relation? Eleanor looked up, her eyes filled with a storm of emotions Maya couldn't decipher. She's my daughter, Eleanor said, her voice barely audible. My estranged daughter. I had no idea she was even working. The case that was about justice, about revenge, about a father's memory, had just become infinitely more complicated. The key witness to the entire event, the one person who could corroborate Maya's story from an impartial viewpoint, was Eleanor Vance's own daughter. A daughter she hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. The revelation that Isabella Vance was the coat check girl sent a shockwave through their strategy. For Eleanor, it was a personal crisis. Her relationship with her daughter had fractured after a bitter fight about Isabella's decision to drop out of college, to find herself a path Eleanor, a woman of relentless ambition, couldn't comprehend. To call her now would feel like using her as a pawn in her own war against Finch. Maya saw the conflict warring in her mentor's face. We don't have to use her, Maya said gently. We have the photograph. We have the journalist. Eleanor took a deep breath, her composure returning, forged by years in the crucible of the courtroom. No, Finch's lawyers will tear the journalist apart as a biased opportunist. The photograph shows a moment in time, but it doesn't have audio. Isabella is the human element. She's the unimpeachable witness. Finch's investigators won't have any dirt on her because she has no connection to this or to me as far as the world is concerned. I have to call her. The call was tense and awkward, but when Eleanor explained the situation, not as a lawyer needing a witness, but as a mother reaching out, something shifted. Isabella, it turned out, had been horrified by what she'd seen that night. She had seen Maya's quiet dignity and Finch's ugly tirade. She'd seen Henderson's cowardly betrayal. She had wanted to do something, but felt powerless. The call from her mother was an opportunity to do the right thing. She agreed to give a statement. Isabella's sworn deposition was devastating. She recounted Finch's words with perfect clarity. She described Henderson physically grabbing Maya's arm. She detailed the shocked reactions of the other diners, coming from a neutral third party with no apparent connection to the case. Her testimony was pure gold. Armed with this new arsenal, the photo, the journalist's corroboration of the illegal meeting, and a bombshell witness, Eleanor made her final move. She didn't go to Henderson's lawyers. She went straight for the jugular. She sent the entire package, Isabella's affidavit, a copy of the photograph, and a letter outlining their knowledge of the stalled development deal directly to the board of directors of Finch Global and to the legal counsel for the city of Chicago. The letter was a masterpiece of legal threat. It laid out a clear narrative. Alistair Finch, while conducting an improper meeting with city officials to influence a multi-billion-dollar project, engaged in such volatile and abusive public behavior that it not only led to a lawsuit against a third party, but also showcased a level of personal instability that should concern any shareholder or municipal partner. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Finch. His board of directors, already nervous about the project's delays, was furious that his personal conduct was now creating legal and PR liabilities. The city council, smelling a political scandal, immediately launched a formal ethics investigation into the meeting with Councilman Sadler. The waterfront deal wasn't just stalled, it was dead, and Finch's reputation was in flames. The king was checked. Finch, for the first time in his professional life, was cornered. His own lawyers advised him that the public relations damage was spiraling out of control. His only way out was to make this all go away quickly and quietly. The call came not from Henderson, but from Finch's lead attorney at Cravath. The tone was no longer arrogant. It was conciliatory. They wanted to settle. All of it. The settlement meeting was held at Eleanor's firm. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender. Alistair Finch was there, a thundercloud of fury in a $1,000 suit. Gerald Henderson sat beside him, looking small and broken. Maya sat next to Eleanor, no longer a waitress, but an equal at the table. Eleanor laid out their terms. They were not negotiable. First, a 7-figure settlement for Maya Rodriguez, a sum significant enough to pay for the rest of her law school education, erase her debt, and guarantee the absolute best medical care for her mother for the rest of her life. Second, Aurelia was to issue a formal public apology to Maya, to be printed in the Chicago Tribune, admitting she was terminated without cause. Third, and this was Eleanor's personal touch, Alistair Finch was to make a substantial, multi-million-dollar donation to the pension fund of Vanguard Automotive Parts, the company he had destroyed 15 years ago. It wouldn't fix the town, but it was a pound of flesh, a symbolic act of justice for her father. And fourth, Maya's final demand, Aurelia had to enter into a 3-year contract with an independent labor rights organization chosen by Eleanor's firm to conduct mandatory semi-annual training for all managers and staff on workplace dignity, anti-harassment, and wrongful termination laws. Finch balked at the pension donation and the public apology. He snarled, "This is extortion." Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes like chips of ice. "No, Mr. Finch. This is a consequence. It's the bill for your behavior, and it has come due. You can sign this agreement, or we can hold a press conference tomorrow with Maya, my daughter, and the photojournalist. We can discuss your business ethics and your personal conduct with every major news outlet in the country. The choice is yours." Faced with total humiliation and further damage to his empire, Finch signed. Henderson, weeping with relief, signed immediately after. Walking out of the conference room, Maya felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the money. It was the feeling of having faced down a giant and won. She hadn't just gotten justice for herself, she had secured protection for her former co-workers and achieved a measure of peace for Eleanor's family. A few weeks later, Maya sat with her mother in the waiting room of a new cutting-edge treatment center. Her mother, holding the Tribune article with Aurelia's apology, looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes. "You always had the heart of a lion, Maya. Now you've shown the world." Across town, Eleanor Vance placed a framed copy of the Vanguard Pension Fund donation receipt on her desk, next to a photo of her father. Later that day, she was having lunch with Isabella. It was a start. Maya never served another plate at Aurelia. Her new life was in the law library, not in a dining room. But she never forgot the lessons from that night. She learned that power, no matter how great, is always vulnerable to the truth. She learned that dignity is not something that can be given or taken away by a man in an expensive suit, and she learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be silent. The waitress was gone. In her place, a lawyer was rising. And there you have it, a story that proves that one person's voice, backed by courage and conviction, can indeed challenge the powerful. Maya's journey wasn't just about getting her job back, it was about reclaiming her dignity, and in doing so creating a ripple effect of justice that touched lives far beyond her own. This story is a powerful reminder that our circumstances don't define our worth, and that standing up for what is right, even when it's terrifying, can change everything. If Maya's story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of fighting for the underdog, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you want more stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of justice, resilience, and sweet, sweet revenge. What did you think of Eleanor's strategy? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for listening.